a loving mother with a selfless spirit.
I remember her laughter. You could hear Mother laughing from 2 rooms away. She was really representative of the goodness in people. She loved her community. They loved her.
Is stabbed to death in a horrifying attack.
It was gruesome crime scene. There was a lot of blood.
Perpetrator left the victim with a 2-pronged serving fork sticking out of her throat.
The amount of devastation led us to believe that it definitely was a crime of passion.
Suspicion falls on those closest to her.
He was the husband that last saw her alive. He didn't really show any signs of grieving. He
failed the polygraph.
My first thought was that it was a domestic assault.
Her son had an argument with his mother that morning.
A neighbor had seen a teenager running away from the home that day.
Months go by without an arrest.
We kept wondering, why is it so hard to capture a murderer in this small town?
Then, just as the case is in danger of going cold, police uncover a dire warning
The note threatened more violence.
that leads to a deranged killer no one could have predicted.
Wow, we didn't see that coming.
Shenandoah, Iowa is a close-knit farming community home to just 5,500 people.
Shenandoah is your typical small town. It's just beautiful. The corn surrounding the towns. Everybody knows one another. You just are almost shocked at how nice folks are.
It's a small, peaceful community. People know their neighbors, take care of each other. You don't have a lot of violent crime of any nature.
The peace is shattered on September 6th, 1988, when police get a disturbing call from local pastor Robert Borton at 3:40 p.m. He tells police his wife of 19 years, Cindy, is dead.
He found her body in the kitchen, lying in a pool of her own blood. He called authorities, who arrived immediately and kept him outside of the house.
It was gruesome crime scene. We found a female on the kitchen floor. There was a lot of blood everywhere. This person had been stabbed many, many times.
The perpetrator left the victim lying on her back in a pool of blood with a 2-pronged serving fork sticking out of her throat. That image stayed with me because it was remarkable in its gruesomeness. There were 4 instruments that appeared to come from her kitchen that were weapons of convenience for the killer.
There were 2 forks, a large 2-pronged fork, a 4-pronged fork, as well as 2 knives. There was a struggle. There were some cuts on her hand where she had fought the person and she had tried to get away from the person. The phone had been ripped off of the wall, and it was obvious that a lot of activity went on while Cindy was being killed.
Detectives observe that the pool of blood is not yet dry, meaning the murder likely happened in the late morning or early afternoon.
In addition to the blood in the kitchen, there were also some stains found in the bathroom.
It was obvious that the person had cleaned up in the bathroom because there wasn't any visible pools of blood, just blood that looked like it had been washed off of hands or clothing. We did not have the benefit of DNA testing back in the 80s. Blood would have been collected still because you can type the blood, and that was what was one thing that we'd be looking at. And of course, fingerprints, obviously, throughout the crime scene.
There was no injury. We were 99% sure that she knew who the perpetrator was. My first thought was that it was a family assault.
The amount of devastation that was there at the crime scene led us to believe that it definitely was a crime of passion.
Detectives had to speak with Cindy's husband, Robert, but are beaten to it by a new arrival at the scene, the couple's 18-year-old son.
I seen an ambulance parked in front of my house, and my father was leaning against the front of my mother's car crying, and I just knew deep down inside me that my world was never going to be the same. I dropped my backpack there in the middle of the yard and went running up to my father, and he then informed me that Mama was gone.
39-year-old Cynthia Borden was a born-bred Iowa girl. She and her brother were raised by loving parents just outside Des Moines.
My mother and my uncle would always tell me about the adventures that they had around the farm. Life was good for them. Everybody had to laugh, according to Mama. I remember her laughter. You could hear Mother laughing from 2 rooms away. You would have to rush in there to find out what it was that was so funny that made Mama laugh.
As a teen, Cindy worked at a local restaurant, and soon after would meet her future husband.
My father wound up coming in there and doing the whole phone number exchange thing, and then they started going out, and one thing led to another.
The couple married in 1969. When the family moved to Shenandoah, Cindy had her hands full.
Mama just kind of assumed the role of the pastor's wife. She also worked at a donut place there. Mama always did what she had to do to take care of the family. I was her everything. I was very much a mama's boy. My mother was love personified.
Cindy's warm heart also extended to those outside the family.
Mama always had an open door policy for all of my friends. They always knew that my mother was there to be a second mother to them, somebody that they could talk to, that she never passed judgment on anybody. She was also very good with giving out the hugs. Mama was always there to give you a hand back up if life knocked you down.
Cindy loved her community. They loved her. She was really representative of a small town in Iowa. The goodness in people.
Cindy's death leaves many in the community wondering who could have killed her. Investigators have an idea on where to start.
Back in that time, about 85% of all homicides in the state of Iowa were committed by someone close to the victim. Husband is always a major suspect at the time we see a homicide like this, especially one with so much rage involved.
Robert was interviewed and gave the following timeline. He had gone to work that morning at Select Motors, where he was a part-time worker because preaching to a small rural congregation is not lucrative employment. Robert returned home at noon, as was his habit. His wife served him spaghetti for lunch, and at 1 o'clock he returned to work. Cindy worked at a local bakery. Her shift was to start at 2 o'clock that day. When she didn't show up for work, her employer became concerned and called Robert. He indicated that he thought perhaps she had simply taken a nap and overslept. Approximately an hour or so later, when she still had not shown up for work, he got the second phone call from his wife's employer. He went home at about 3:30 in the afternoon to discover Cindy dead on the kitchen floor.
What Robert says he did next raises a red flag to detectives.
After finding his wife and then calling to get some help, he took the dog out instead of, being there for his wife or trying to do something for his wife. He said he wanted it to be tied up so that the ambulance people wouldn't have to deal with his pets. That was very unusual and very strange.
Then, Robert offers up a theory investigators find completely ludicrous.
Bob was saying that his wife could have just tripped and fell onto this fork. That was totally not plausible. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just, I can't imagine anyone ending up in a situation, and certainly not with the amount of blood that was found there at the scene, too.
He thought that it was an accident. And that really raised eyebrows. How could you possibly think that someone had just fallen? You just think, well, this is someone who snapped.
Bob Borton was our prime suspect immediately after the death of Cynthia Borton, because first of all, he was the last person to see her alive, and then he also was the one that found her.
Coming up, suspicion swells around Cindy's husband.
His work clothing was laundered before investigators had an opportunity to examine it for blood spatter.
What does Robert Borton have to hide?
The only thing I want him to say is, I did it.
While police dig for evidence against their top suspect, a threatening clue sends shockwaves through the town.
There were a great many different and wild rumors, leaving notes at the scene. Cynthia Borton nothing compared to what's coming. And hints such as the NS Night Stalker.
This story just got even more crazy and more sensational and more scary.
Police in Shenandoah, Iowa are investigating the gruesome murder of 39-year-old Cynthia Borton. Her husband Robert's erratic behavior is putting him in detective spotlight.
Robert commented that his wife had simply fallen on an serving fork and died an accidental death. These comments were certainly unusual and suspicious.
Police bring Robert to the station for a formal interview.
Bob did have a very strange personality and strange mannerisms about him when he was interviewed. He didn't really show any signs of grieving. You would have expected that a man having just lost his wife would be very emotional at the time he was being interviewed, but we didn't see that with Bob Borton. He was very matter-of-fact. He was just so casual in talking even about finding his wife. He acted like that was just an everyday thing. You know, it was just like talking about, well, what's the weather going to be like today?
Detectives question Robert about his relationship with Cindy.
He told us about, having arguments once in a while. He went in kind of a defensive mode about the questioning. When they're reacting like that, it does put up a red flag like that.
Investigators try to provoke a telling reaction out of Robert.
He didn't get upset when I accused him of being the one responsible for his wife's death. He didn't show sadness. He didn't cry.
His stoic but unemotional denials only increased their suspicions.
At that point in time, Bob Borton couldn't be held at all. We had no evidence to show that he was responsible. We had no information other than his matter-of-fact attitude.
Robert provides fingerprint samples, but with nothing concrete linking him to the murder, investigators must let him go.
This, frankly, was frustrating to some of the investigators involved in the case.
Cindy's body has been sent to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. While police wait to learn a specific time of death, they look to verify Robert's whereabouts.
His boss alibied him for the time that he said that he was at work that day.
Knowing it's still possible Robert killed Cindy when he went home on his lunch break at noon, what his boss tells detectives next rings alarm bells.
He changed his clothes when he went back to work.
Before the body was found, he dropped off his work clothing. It was laundered before investigators had an opportunity to examine it for blood spatter.
Had this all been part of Robert's well-executed plan?
There isn't always transfer of blood from a victim to a perpetrator, even in an extremely bloody killing such as this one. Of course, the likelihood that there would be made it important to examine the clothing, and that was impossible because those clothes, as it happened, were very quickly laundered.
That certainly was a little detail that made us think that it was him.
Investigators conducted a great deal of background interviews with neighbors, friends, co-workers.
We did look into the relationship between Robert and Cynthia Borton to see if the good marriage, and we did determine that they did have some problems. Everything wasn't roses and everything wasn't as you might think.
There was quarreling in the house. We thought maybe he had a lot of rage that he wanted to get rid of, and he was taking it out on Cindy. But we had never been called there for family disturbance or anything.
Needing to verify information about Cindy and Robert's relationship, detectives seek out their son, John, but the teen has vanished.
On the day she passed, all I did was shut down. My best friend, Jim, and his mother and father came driving by in their car and attempted to speak with me. I was not in the mood to talk. And then I just kept on walking.
When John arrives back home that night, detectives are there waiting.
They wanted everything that I could tell them while it was still all fresh in my mind. My father and I were still of the impression that it could have been accidental.
When asked about his parents' relationship, John admits there were problems.
There was some disagreements and a little bit of an argument, and then they realized that could I actually find anybody better for me? The answer they came up with was no, so was like, we were happy one time. We need to figure this out, get it worked out. That whole part of the wedding vows of till death do us part, they both took that very seriously.
John is too upset to say much more. Police end their conversation, but plan to talk with him again when he's less distraught. Officers are then dispatched to canvass the area around the Borton home.
They talk to the neighbors and try to find out if there's anybody who witnessed anything suspicious.
A neighbor had seen a teenager running away from the home that day, actually in the afternoon.
The neighbor's description of the teen sounds strikingly familiar.
John Borton, Cynthia's son, fit the description of the person that had run away from the house.
Had John come home early from school to murder his own mother?
It was a fascinating story. It was a mystery. He seemed like your typical teenager.
Bob Borton and also John Borton were the main and only suspects.
That in itself was the shocking part.
Detectives investigating the vicious slaying of Cynthia Borton have two prime suspects. Her husband Robert, who found her dead, and now their 18-year-old son, who matches the description of a teen seen fleeing the area around the time of the murder.
John Borton, even though he was scheduled to have been at school that day, might have come home early. So John Borton early on was a person that we wanted to talk with and get more details about where he was on that day.
The day after the murder, John is brought to the police department for another interview.
They started with the questions about the home life and everything else. I told them my mother was literally my whole world.
When detectives asked John about the last time he saw his mother, he makes a startling admission.
John indicated in his interview that he had had an argument with his mother that morning. That, of course, was interesting and relevant information.
Mother and I did disagree because I was not in the mood to go to school that day. My last words to my mother that day were a bit harsh. I have zero pride or pleasure that I can take from that particular morning.
John maintains he was at school the entire day, but he didn't have any classes between noon and 3 p.m., the approximate window of time when detectives suspect Cindy was murdered.
The whole tone of the investigation changed. They were considering me personally to be a suspect. Who on earth could think that I would do this to my mother?
In a household with 3 people, the 2 surviving occupants would always be interviewed and looked at to see if they had an alibi.
We tried to determine with anybody at the school to make sure that they saw him there and to make sure that he was in fact in school, not just that he was supposed to be at school, but that people actually did see him there during that day.
Investigators took aside 2 of John's friends, Jim and Jackson, to find out if there was anything that might cause them to be concerned about John as a suspect.
The teens can't confirm John was at school the entire day, but they're adamant he's not the killer.
One of the first people to console him about his mother's death was Jim Bettis.
Friends of John Borton said Cynthia Borton's murder had been true devastation for John.
I heard some of my teachers kind of speaking in kind of a low, hushed tone thing that the detectives had come by and questioned them as to whether or not I was actually at school. Could anybody verify that I was there all day like I was supposed to be? Eventually, they were able to reconstruct my alibi for the entire afternoon.
Detectives talked with his teachers who verified that he had spent that full day at school.
Cynthia's son John is ruled out as a suspect. 3 days later, the autopsy report comes in, and police look for any insight into what exactly happened that gruesome day.
Cindy suffered a horrifying death. The medical examiner found that Cindy had been stabbed 29 times with at least 4 different instruments, 2 knives and 2 serving forks. In addition to stab wounds that directly led to her death by puncturing vital organs, she had defensive wounds on her hands and forearms. She struggled with her assailant. She had to know that she was dying at the hands of her killer.
The autopsy report also provides a detail crucial to the investigation. investigation.
Based upon his finding of a stomach full of completely undigested spaghetti, the medical examiner estimated the time of death as 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Cindy and Robert had shared a meal of spaghetti between 12 and 1 o'clock. Robert placed himself in that home alone in his wife's company at the estimated time of death.
It really made Bob Borton our prime suspect. He was the husband that last saw her alive. He was the husband that was the first to find her dead on the kitchen floor. He and his wife had had difficulties throughout their marriage, had problems.
Investigators decided that it was important to keep working on Robert. He was really their only feasible suspect.
Based on the findings of the autopsy report and mounting circumstantial evidence, Robert is called back in for another interview.
One of our agents was very aggressive in interrogating Bob Borton about his wife's murder and accusing him of being the murderer. And Bob again sat very calm and still and was not irate about being accused of having taken his wife's life. The investigators decided to give me a call and ask me to conduct a polygraph examination of Bob Borton and do that right away before he had a chance to think twice about it. The relevant questions that I asked Bob Borton is, were you responsible for your wife's death? Did you cause your wife's death? Did you stab your wife? He was just very humdrum, very relaxed, and very, well, I guess, you'll have to do what you have to do because I didn't do it.
The polygraph results tell a different story.
He failed the polygraph. The results were that he was lying and that he was culpable in this crime. So investigators were, in fact, increasingly convinced that Robert had killed his wife.
After the gruesome murder of Cindy Borton, her husband Robert, the prime suspect in her murder, has failed a polygraph.
When I did see those results, the thing that next happens is for me to go in and interrogate him and try to determine why he was being deceptive. I needed to try to get a confession from him. When I confronted him with the results of the polygraph examination, he didn't shake his head no that he didn't do it. He didn't try to respond to me in any way, shape, or form. He just basically sat in a chair and didn't move. The only thing I want him to say is, I did it. And so we were very aggressive in interrogating Bob Borton about his wife's murder.
Robert Borton never wavered in his denial that he was responsible for this.
Robert's behavior under questioning becomes even more unusual.
He did, in fact, fall asleep in the chair. The only time that anybody has ever fallen asleep in the middle of one of my interrogations. Bob Borton's reactions were not what we would have considered to be normal.
Despite failing the polygraph, the evidence against Robert is purely circumstantial, so detectives have no choice but to let him go.
At that point in time, we're thinking we must have missed something. There must be something more involved that we're not aware of.
The lack of an arrest unsettles the town further.
The people of the community really are concerned when there is an immediate suspect, why that person's not apprehended and taken to jail. But we need more information. We need more evidence.
The members of the community were increasingly convinced that Robert had killed his wife. They expressed those concerns. They brought a great deal of pressure on the chief of police.
The public was just as anxious to get it solved as the police was. We wanted to get this case cleared up so gossip and things would die down after, of course, this happened. He wasn't preaching for a while, and then people just quit attending.
There was a real change my father noticed. People who were open and friendly with him, all of a sudden, they quite often would go as far as to cross the street so that they would not have to walk near him, would not have to speak with him. I did my best to at least attempt to continue my life as well as I could.
Laying Cindy to rest is tough on the young teen.
The only time I can remember my mother having a brand new dress was the one bought for her to bury her in. It's the only brand new dress I ever recall her having.
2 months after Cindy's murder, Robert and John leave Shenandoah.
It was unbearable for my father to continue to live there. People who he had been friends before had shut him out.
He moved to a town 3 hours away, and we watched his movements, where he went, who he was meeting with.
The police were really struggling because they had nothing. They had no one else.
2.5 months later, when the state crime lab sends investigators the results of the fingerprint analysis, they hope it'll be the crucial evidence for which they've been waiting.
Robert's fingerprints were not found on any of the murder weapons or the phone. This, frankly, was frustrating to some of the investigators involved in the case. It was solid evidence that someone other than Robert Borton was very possibly the guilty party in this murder.
The news is a huge blow to the investigation.
It's concerning whenever cases are not immediately solvable, and as time passes, the prospects for solving them become smaller and smaller.
We just waited for authorities to make an arrest. And when they didn't make an arrest in the months that were going by, that's when we started to realize this is somebody that they don't know who it is.
3 months after the murder, as detectives redouble their efforts to unearth new suspects, another crime in Shenandoah comes to their attention.
In the weeks preceding and following the murder of Cindy Borton, there were arsons in the town of Shenandoah. Even though arson is a different crime than murder, it's a violent crime. And when one has a series of violent crimes, in this case, the arsons and the murder, all occurring within a matter of weeks, it would be only normal to at least examine the possibility of a connection between the two.
On November 30th, another arson occurs, and a clue found at the scene leaves investigators stunned.
The arsonist left a note referring to the 2 prior arsons and Cynthia Borton, and in fact threatened more violence in that community, saying that the arsons and Cindy Borton ain't nothing compared to what's coming.
Oh my gosh, this story just got even more crazy and more sensational and more scary.
Detectives hunting the killer of Cindy Borton have just received a mysterious clue linking her murder to a series of arson fires across town.
There was a note that was, in fact, very intriguing, and the note referred to all 3 arsons and Cindy Borton, obviously raising the possibility that the perpetrator of the arsons was also the perpetrator of the Cindy Borton murder. The note in question was signed The Night Stalker, NS, which copied the name of a highly publicized murderer in California.
At the time, the Night Stalker had already been arrested, so this was clearly a copycat killer.
It was rather apparent that the perpetrator was someone who used that name out of convenience and imitation.
He was calling himself the Night Stalker. Wow, he's just crazy.
There were a great many different and wild rumors, leaving notes at the scene and hints such as the NS Night Stalker were quite possibly a cry for attention. This would have to be investigated. The note was examined for fingerprints, and indeed some latent fingerprint ridge detail was found on the note.
The prints are sent to the crime lab for analysis.
It was important not only to continue investigating the murder, but also to investigate the arsons for purpose of developing a suspect on the murder. There had been 3 arsons in the community. One had been at the Broad Street School. The letters NS were found slashed on a bridge near the Broad Street School fire.
There was another fire set in a school teacher's pickup, and there was a note, "The Night Stalker strikes again."
This case was a genuine whodunit. Even though we had the Night Stalker note, investigators didn't know who had authored it or who had committed the arsons.
I never really would have expected this case to go where it went. You know, it wasn't something that we expected from the beginning at all.
Several days later, detectives get the fingerprint results from the note, and they don't match back to anyone in their database.
There was, in fact, a killer at loose in their community.
As every week went by, and then the months, we kept wondering, why is it so hard to capture a murderer in this small town who committed a murder in such a shocking, unbelievable manner?
On January 31st, 1989, police finally get a break in the case.
5 months after this murder, a young man named Jackson, a high school student, came into the police department and informed authorities the previous day he'd had a visit from a friend, another teenager, and that in the course of their afternoon visiting with each other, this friend had told him that he had some very shocking information and something that was bothering him. More specifically, that he had murdered Cynthia Borton. This information was a shock that shed an entirely new light on the investigation.
When Jackson came into the Shenandoah Police Department, yes, that definitely was a big break. His friend had told him things that happened at the crime scene that only the killer would know.
Jackson's friend described the murder that he had committed and even went so far as to draw a small diagram indicating exactly where the body had been left in the house. Jackson shared this drawing as well with the authorities, which was important and surprising because it appeared quite accurate.
He told Jackson, "I'm going to show you where the knife is." And he did that. And that's when Jackson realized, oh, he's really done this. And later that day, even though he was sworn to secrecy, he thought about his own mom and how the killer had been a guest in their house. And he thought, wow, that could have been my mom. So it wasn't hard for him to go to the police after that.
At this point, investigators were aware that Jackson had indeed very likely spoken to Cindy Borton's murderer.
Jackson said that James Bettis was the one responsible for killing Cynthia Borton.
Jim Bettis was a close friend of John Borton. They were classmates until Jimmy dropped out of high school. He was close enough to John and interacted with the Bortons so much that Cindy was very involved in Jim's life. He even thought of Cindy as a second mother to him. She tried to help him, tried to persuade him to return to school and get an education. She was a very good friend and mother figure to the young man. Jim was certainly not a suspect up to this point, but his statement to Jackson rang true.
It was amazement at that point in time because we talked to James Bettis previously. James Bettis became the prime suspect because of his admissions to his friend, but we need more corroboration. He was taken to the Shenandoah Police Department and he was interviewed. Jim did confess to the arsons, as a matter of fact, but denied ever having said anything to Jackson about Cynthia Borton's murder or having any involvement in Cynthia Borton's murder.
Jim agrees to have his fingerprints collected. He's also willing to undergo a polygraph.
During the polygraph examination, the questions I was asked were, was he involved in the death of Cynthia Borton? Specifically, whether he was the one that committed the crime.
Jimmy Bettis insisted throughout that he did not kill Cindy Borton.
When I quantified the polygraph examinations and I actually gave a numerical figure to each of his reactions, if they're over a -6, that strongly indicates to us that he's deceptive. James Bettis came up a -23. So there is absolutely no question he was the one involved in Cynthia Borton's murder.
It was a big shock. It really left us, and I think everyone, scratching their head. Wow, we didn't see that coming.
After the horrific slaying of Cindy Borton, detectives get their biggest break when her son's friend fails a polygraph.
Jim Bettis' polygraph, according to Agent McCleary, showed deception on his denial that he had murdered Cindy Borton.
It was very unusual that all of a sudden this person would become a suspect who was a teenager, and also he was good friends with Cynthia's son. And he had been in Cynthia's house many occasions.
Investigators confront Jim with the results.
The very next thing I said was, we all know exactly what happened on September 6th. You are the one responsible for having killed Cynthia Borton. There's no question in anybody's mind now. And he came out and said, I did it. Okay, I did it.
Jim Bettis had not been on our radar at all. We never dreamed that he might be capable of something like this.
James Bettis told me that on September 6th of 1988. He was walking around town. He was thinking about his father. He was thinking about how he hated his father.
His dad was always telling him that he was no good. He wasn't going to amount to anything. It was terrible. He hated his dad.
He needed to be able to get that rage out. And how he was going to do that was by seeing if he could actually kill.
His statement was that he wanted to kill his father. but that he knew he couldn't get that job done, and so he killed someone who was far more vulnerable, and that Cynthia Borton was a victim of convenience.
Police believe Jim showed up at the Borton household, just narrowly missing Robert, who had gone back to work after lunch.
Cynthia Borton answered the door and allowed him to come in because he had been there many times previously.
During his confession, Jimmy Bettis indicated that he had asked Cindy for a glass of water, which led her to walk into the kitchen. He followed her there, approaching her from behind, and grabbing a knife, immediately slashed her throat from behind. He stated he had used a pocket knife of his own in addition to Cynthia Borton's kitchen utensils. And that after the crime, he took his pocket knife, stained with Cindy Borton's blood, and threw it under a bridge. This was important information. It would corroborate his confession if in fact that knife could be found, and if in fact it had Cindy Borton's blood on it. Investigators scoured the area, found the knife where Jimmy Bettis described that they would find it, and when it was tested at the laboratory, indeed it had not only Cindy Borton's blood, but also Jimmy Bettis's fingerprint.
On February 2nd, 1989, detectives charged 18-year-old Jim Bettis with first-degree murder and 3 counts of arson.
The investigator told me that Jim had been arrested and he had confessed repeatedly. My first response was, no, he did not do this. He was my best friend. He was the first person that I trusted that was not an actual blood relative. It occurred to me that in at least some way I am responsible for this because I am the reason that he came into my house, that he was accepted into my house, and my mother is gone. There is nothing I can do to get her back.
At trial, Jim is convicted, and on November 13th, 1989, he's sentenced to life in prison.
Jimmy Bettis was a very troubled and angry and rage-filled young man. Had this crime not been solved when it was, there's every reason to be concerned that there would have been more fires, if not more murders.
My best friend committed this heinous crime of murder against somebody who trusted him, supported him, and cared for him. He frequently told me that we were brothers forever, and I honestly felt the same thing for him. And then for him to turn around and do such a horrific action, there is a bit of relief knowing that he will never be out again for the rest of his life.
Couples in love make promises, in sickness and in health, to have and to hold. But when the past catches up to you, a couple can find the real meaning of the phrase, love you to death.
Am I ever gonna love again? Am I ever gonna love again?
When she was found, they were planning a wedding. And that wedding was less than 48 hours away.
Never would have thought that I would have been going to her funeral that next week instead of her wedding. Never would have thought it.
She come in the door and then she said, I'm here to get a marriage license. A lot of things happened after that. I don't want to cry.
Hours away from becoming a bride, Molly Watson's story takes a tragic turn when a stranger makes a discovery on a country road.
April 27th of 2018. It was a Friday night.
Glenn McSparron is taking a shortcut from his mother's home there in Monroe County.
Didn't really think of it, just a typical night. It's remote. It's really grown You're driving in between trees and horseweeds down to the creek. You got to turn as you go down into it and go across it. The road kind of curves.
That night, he says he saw headlights.
He saw a car come up and kind of cut him off, put their headlights right into his view.
And once I got a little bit closer, I could see that there was a car, and I thought that they wanted past me, so I pulled over to the side of the road, and I could see another car parked over on the right, facing away from me.
He said he saw a short, white guy driving the car.
Glenn McSparron described the car with the older white man as an old grandma car.
I couldn't hardly see him because of all the glare, and I just kind of turned my head towards the window and I said, "Hey, is somebody stuck down there?" And how did he say that? He said, "I don't know where they're at. It's going to be a while."
Glenn McSparron had a brief verbal exchange with this older white male, and the other individual indicated that Glenn needed to go around a different way.
So I just backed my truck up a little bit and went back to the west. The more I thought about it, I was like, something's not right. I talked to my mom and my brother for a minute, and I told them, I said, "I'm going to go back through there."
On his way back, just 30 minutes later, a horrific scene, a body in his headlight.
I stayed in my truck, and I called 911.
I don't know what the hell's going on here.
They wanted me to just make sure if she was alive or not.
Ma'am. Oh my God. I don't think she's alive, no.
I seen if she was cold to the touch or if she had a pulse, and she did not. And I looked in her eyes, and I could tell that she was gone.
Her eyes are open. I swear to God, she's dead.
She was essentially shot execution style. She had been shot once in the back of the head at point-blank range.
The idea that it never happens here, in this country corner of Missouri, is pretty much right.
123.
Police go into full investigative mode, and there's evidence to be found. In the muddy crime scene, they find tire tracks remarkably well preserved.
And there appeared to be markings that looked like two O's.
I think everybody looking thought that it was probably a Goodyear tire. I came upon this shirt laying in the road, went around the shirt and past it, and then I stopped, and I'm thinking, we're kind of close to the crime scene here. I probably better pick that up just in case.
That t-shirt, we later learned, had gunshot residue on it, had Molly Watson's blood.
On a road leading away from the scene, they find an empty box.
It was an empty .22 caliber ammunition box. A .22 would be considered a small caliber firearm, along with several other calibers.
An autopsy later recovers a bullet.
It revealed that it was a small caliber weapon that was used to kill her.
The bullet that they found was too damaged to be able to match it up with any particular firearm.
All we can say about the projectile is that it would be consistent with a small caliber ammunition.
We initially run the vehicle registration, things of that nature. We were eventually able to figure out that the victim was Molly Watson.
Police wake up the family in the middle of the night with some pretty bad news.
My wife woke me up, said, "Your dad's on the phone. He doesn't sound good. Something happened." I'll never forget my dad. He said, "Timmy," he said, "the highway patrol just left our house." I was like, "What happened?" He said, "They found Molly dead in the road." I was like, "What?"
You know how old she is now?
Police want to know what brought Molly to this dark, desolate place, and even more puzzling, who'd have a reason to kill her?
Molly Watson's body was found
wearing her engagement ring
on her left ring finger. They were planning a wedding.
Wedding of her dreams.
That wedding was less than 48 hours away.
We always heard about the wedding. We were very excited about the wedding. You know, the colors, the theme, the decorations.
Molly has a wedding planner who's working on the details.
There's a lot of burgundy and gold. Kind of reminded me of like a Renaissance kind of theme.
Two dresses she could not make up her mind. this dress, as you will see with it on me, I show it with me wearing one ball gown crinoline.
Molly Watson is 35. Her friends describe her as sweet, creative, bubbly.
Me and Molly were both kind of goofballs, but she was like my best friend.
Lots of artwork, costuming. She was really good at that.
She has a YouTube channel. She plays with makeup and shows off her sewing.
She wanted to start like a weekly vlog where she would, just talk about herself or what's going on in her life.
I work in education right now. I have 2 degrees in psychology, a bachelor's and a master's.
She wanted to be a singer for a long time, and she had a really good singing voice.
I am going to sing the healing incantation from Tangled. Flower, gleam and glow, let your power shine.
Molly was married in her early 20s. The relationship didn't last more than a few years. During the breakup, she's pregnant and has a son.
Declan was her world. She would take him to the zoo, she would take him out anywhere with her. That was just her world right there.
Later, she dates a woman she'd known since they were in kindergarten together. But that relationship falls apart when Molly meets somebody new at the prison where she works as a corrections officer, a lieutenant named James Addy. He's 16 years older than she is, and Molly's brother says the couple doesn't spend much time with her family.
There was definitely an age gap there. At first, it was weird for us, but, everybody kind of got past it.
I asked her, what does your family think about him? And she was really kind of hesitant, and she said, my family doesn't really like him. They've only met him a few times.
But Addie's brother looked up to him.
Growing up, Jim, he was a role model and example. He was in the Marine Corps. And then from the Marine Corps, he got out after Desert Storm and just created a life.
Molly told her brother that James mentioned he'd been married a few times. One marriage to a woman named Melanie resulted in 2 children, Ben and Emma.
I loved Melanie. She was always nice, always kind, funny. It was just Melanie. The type of women that Jim liked were very, very nice, very kind.
At this point, James and Molly seem to be a couple, and he's quite the romantic. He writes, "You're truly the love of my life, now and forever. You are my everything. I adore you."
After 7 years of having this relationship with James, she surprises her family. She suddenly announces, "I'm engaged."
You were booked for her makeup and hair 3 years ago.
Yes.
What did you know about Molly and the wedding and her fiancé?
I remember meeting her. She was so excited. She wanted a Disney theme.
A wonderful wedding had been planned at the Stony Creek Inn. Molly had invited her family here to come to this event.
She was bubbly, she was happy, she enjoyed talking about her wedding. James was kind of the opposite of Molly. He was very quiet, didn't show much enthusiasm. I just thought he was just a groom along for the ride.
And then, according to Molly's brother, in the middle of planning the wedding, James gives Molly some terrible news about Melanie, the mother of his children.
James had told Molly, who told me, that Melanie was involved in December in a really bad car wreck and that she was on life support. And they didn't think she was going to make it.
When I was reaching out to Molly to try to get a meeting scheduled, she had mentioned that James's ex-wife had passed away from a car accident over the holidays. So he had to go do a funeral stuff with his kids when we were trying to meet.
There are some last-minute changes. James and Molly cut their guest list in half, and it turns out his daughter, Emma, won't need the hair and makeup team.
The plan was that she had a stepdaughter who she was planning to do hair and makeup on.
I did also want to let you know that it is just going to be me getting hair and makeup done. My soon-to-be stepdaughter has decided she and a friend are going to do each other's hair and makeup, so we're just going to go that route.
Molly worries that her fiancé may be getting cold feet.
Are you changing your mind?
Not at all.
Then what?
It worries me that you were changing yours.
I wasn't.
Good.
2 days to go till the wedding. The couple are meeting at the county recorder's office to get their marriage license. He remembers Molly well.
The cameras I got in the back of my office for security filmed all that. Molly Watson come in the door just shortly before 4 o'clock, and she said, I'm here to get a marriage license. And she was quite pleasant to talk to. We had a good time.
You can see James there in his uniform, running late, hurrying inside.
And then Mr. Addy walked in the door, and he was not smiling. He was acting like this was not the place he wanted to be in. She reached right over to him and was touching his arm and stuff, and she would pat him on the back, and she would lean into him a little bit.
He watches as they leave the office, hand in hand.
That's just tough. It really is, because she was a sweet girl. A lot of things happened after that. I don't want to cry.
Just hours later, that marriage certificate is found at the crime scene.
Her marriage certificate was located in her car.
That had her name in there as well as her fiancé's name.
Now, in the middle of the night, there's something they've got to do right away. They head to her fiancé's house.
So they went to his house that evening.
While the trooper is there in the home, he makes a startling discovery. There's another woman in James Addy's house. She asks the trooper, "What are you doing here?" And I imagine the trooper probably felt much of the same thing. "What are you doing here?"
It turns out the woman who was there is James Addy's wife, Melanie Addy.
She's his wife? That guy's living a complete double life. What is going on here?
When police show up at James Addy's door to tell him that Molly, his fiancée, is dead, his wife is as surprised to see them as they are to see her.
About 2:30, I think, I saw police car lights out my window. It was very strange to see that. I didn't know what was happening.
She wasn't ready for everything that was about to come. She wasn't prepared that he had this whole other life that was happening without her.
He admits that he was cheating on Melanie with Molly, and that yes, they had been engaged to be married.
Mr. Addy became visibly hot and uncomfortable during that interview. So hot and uncomfortable that he actually walked over to his window, opened it, and put a box fan there to blow the cool air in. James Addy volunteered that the last time he had spoken with Molly Watson was earlier in that evening, and showed the police a screenshot of a 22-minute phone call from her to him.
For police, everything has changed since that very first moment that they walked into the Addy's house. This man has a wife. He was sweating in the interview. He's got phone and text messages that seem ever so suspicious. So for police, there's plenty. What do? They arrest him. They charge him with first-degree murder.
Now the trick is building a case.
You doing all right, sir? Okay. Not really.
Watching your husband loaded into a police car has to be hard for Melanie when you think about the snapshots of her life before.
Tell me about meeting James Addy.
I was working at a convenience store, and he was a customer. He came in a lot and finally asked me out.
And once you two hit it off, did he pop the question pretty soon?
Very quickly, maybe 6 months.
That's the wedding photo.
Mm-hmm.
You look so young, both of you.
We didn't have a lot of money, and we had Ben on the way very quickly.
When Ben came into the picture, man, I remember going up to their house. It was always fun. So happy.
A few years later, Emma comes along. So your family's growing.
It was exactly what we wanted. We had these 2 great kids. I was a stay-at-home mom. He went to work. It was a very traditional way to do things. I thought it was very good. I love that picture, yeah. All of us together at Christmas time.
As the years go on, their lives seem so normal. James clashes with his teen son, but Melanie says she felt her husband was dedicated to his family and very loyal. She never suspected that he was being unfaithful. Did you get any sense of whether he was contented and happy in the marriage?
He seemed the same all the time.
Melanie did admit that the marriage had its ups and downs, but in her mind, they had always been able to work through whatever the issues were. This was her reality. Everything was the same, but the fact is, it wasn't. James Addy was in a completely different place.
He was over it. He was done. He didn't love her anymore.
James Addy, for the past 7 years, had been living 2 lives.
How was he able to separate both of these lives?
He's a very good liar.
At one point, he takes a trip to Florida on his own. What was that trip about?
He told me it was a trip related to his work, where they were doing some training.
He took the extra step and printed out what looked like a business letter, made it look official that that's what he was doing, but he was taking the trip to Florida with Molly.
As I talk to Melanie, knowing where this is going, it's hard not to be a little incredulous. But no matter what I ask, she's consistent. She did not know the truth about what was going on.
He would get off work at 3, and usually he would get home at 5. And I would say, well, why are you always so late? And that would be an argument. He didn't want to tell me anything.
Any suspicions?
Not about an affair, no.
So let's go back then to April 27, 2018. Any strange behavior on his part?
No, not at all. Nothing. He just seemed like he always did. About 7 o'clock, he came in to the living room where I was and said he was going to a friend's house.
Did it strike you as unusual or odd?
I remember being irritated that I wanted him to just be home, and he had a hard time staying home.
Do you remember when he came home?
I was asleep.
And whatever time James Addy got home, well, Melanie says that she woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of his snoring. And she says she did what she normally does, move to the couch in the living room.
The police tell you,
yes,
that your husband has a dead fiancé?
Yes.
And he's engaged to the woman. Yeah. And you're learning all of this in one
Immediately,
night.
yeah.
And you've been married for 23
years.
What did you think?
I can't even tell you. It was just mind-boggling. It made no sense at all. None.
Were you angry? Were you hurt? What were you feeling?
Probably just disbelief in the beginning. It didn't seem right. This was not my life.
Did you think that your husband was capable of murder?
Yes. It just seemed like something he would do to fix a problem. He was a pretty selfish person. He could be controlling and intimidating, and it could be challenging.
Melanie Addy begins searching her house. She searches a loft-type area above the garage, which she rarely went into, and found a photo album.
She finds several photos of Jim and Molly together, smiling, a happy couple.
She found the photos of them in Florida on this trip that she had thought was a harmless business for him to go on, that he was actually there with his fiancée getting ready to get married.
Were you asking yourself, how could I have missed this?
Oh, absolutely. Every day. Every day. How do you not see this? I guess because I wasn't supposed to see it.
So he's under arrest. He's in jail.
Yes.
Do you go visit him?
The following week. We were both in tears. Both in tears.
What is he saying to you?
That he's sorry. He's very sorry for the affair, but he insists that he was not the killer. That he is not responsible for this.
Was there a part of you that felt for him on any level?
Absolutely. Because I felt like, I have to take care of him. This is what we do. We take care of each other.
Did you look at him suddenly as a stranger? As somebody you didn't know?
I looked at him as someone I didn't want back.
Now investigators have got to untangle this mess. They have to have evidence. They have a t-shirt, the ammunition box, and now there's one other item they find near that dirt road. A cell phone. Molly's cell phone. That phone now means that prosecutors can take the case to the courtroom. There's another voice that will be heard.
Like they say, deceased person doesn't speak, but it's almost like Molly was speaking from the grave.
James Addy, the former prison guard, now underguard himself, At trial, lead investigator Bradley Ream takes the stand to testify about that jaw-dropping moment in the Addy home.
I asked her who she was. She replied, "I am his wife." I was like, whoa, and I was wondering what was going on. And he told me that I got myself involved in something I shouldn't have.
Glenn McSparron testifies about finding Molly.
When you first went to the water crossing the first time, was there another car present?
Yes, there was. We came upon a pair of headlights down by the creek, and then I could tell there was another car facing away from me.
Glenn McSparron testifies about seeing that man at the crime scene, but in a blow to the prosecution, he can't identify James Addy as the man he saw.
I couldn't get a really 100% clear look at him.
But McSparron's description of the car that man was driving, that old grandma car, police say matches Addy's car. And then they take a good look at the tires. Prosecutors say one of the tires on Addy's car, a Goodyear, is just the kind that could leave a double O impression like the one found near Molly Watson's body.
It wasn't just that double O print from the side of the Goodyear tire. Officers have something more. What prosecutors call a perfect tire print in the mud, just a few feet from Molly's body.
A state crime lab expert testifies that he compared the right rear tire on Addy's car to a cast that was made at the scene of the crime next to Molly's body.
And what conclusion did you draw, if any, about the tire and the cast?
My conclusion was that particular tire made that particular impression.
Prosecutors are convinced that this tire track matches Addy's car. The defense is saying, not so fast.
All right, I'd like to talk to you about this comparison that we just had that states
there is no widely accepted scientific principle behind an examiner looking at one tire and looking at a cast and saying they look the same to me.
State's Exhibit 67.
Could you explain to the jury what they're looking at here?
That is an empty ammo box of 22 caliber.
A prosecution witness testifies that bullets found in the 22 caliber rifle found in James Addy's home are consistent with the Thunderbolt ammunition, the kind that came in that empty ammo box they found. Even so, that doesn't prove that it's the murder weapon.
Prosecutors call a long parade of highway patrol investigators and criminalists, and then they introduce a key item of evidence.
A cell phone. Molly's cell phone.
Molly Watson's cell phone was a vital link in the chain of evidence for prosecutors.
Information from her cell phone did tell us that she had driven from her home to this location while she was on the phone with James Addy.
Investigators are poring over all these text messages between James and Molly, and what they're hoping to do is reconstruct the events leading up to her killing. And maybe they'll find even a triggering moment that caused it to happen.
And investigators say there's a reference to that story about Addy's wife Melanie dying after a car crash. Prosecutors say Addy texted Molly that his ex-wife's funeral was happening the day before their wedding.
The funeral is tomorrow.
I'm sorry, sweetness. I love you so much.
Why would James Addy lie? Why tell Molly that his ex-wife Melanie was dead? Some speculate that maybe he hoped the story about the car crash would cause his fiancée to postpone the wedding and the collision of his two lives. But instead, it may have sped up his day of reckoning.
Molly, at a certain point, did try to look into this and question this, according to some of the things brought up in court.
Forensic searches of Molly's phones indicated that the day before she was murdered, she was looking for Melanie Addy's obituary.
Was obviously unable to find an obituary for Melanie Addy.
Prosecutors point out that Molly's online search happens the day before her murder and argue this theory. Molly figures out that James's wife isn't dead and confronts him, and they say that's what led him to kill her.
Did James Addy have a plan to see Molly that night?
Stated here in the exhibit, the text message says, "I think I'm going to see you tonight." And that was sent from James's purple phone to Molly.
He knew. He knew what was going to happen. He knew how that date was going to end. Earlier in the evening of April 27th, before James Addy departed his home, he had sent text messages from himself to himself.
Have a meeting tonight at 8. Normal place. You have to be there.
James Addy seems to be almost firing himself up to do something. drastic.
Don't be a again. Let's go, man.
It was as if one part of him was telling the other to, come on, we can do this. Let's go.
Trying to psych himself up for something. Obviously now we know what it is. Don't be a man. Let's go, man. He's talking himself into it. He's getting himself ready.
Molly was lured to this Monroe County road. A 22-minute phone call and a 22-minute drive to her death.
For the next 30 minutes or so, police say that Addie's phones, both of them, are silent. No calls, no texting.
That is when he killed Molly Watson.
What could have or would have been James Addie's closest allies as a criminal defendant, his wife and his daughter, are now actually going to take the stand against him.
Were you aware that you were on a guest list to attend your dad's wedding? Will you please state your name and spell it for the court reporter?
Emma Addie, EMMAADDIE.
The evidence at trial showed that Emma Addie had actually met Molly Watson previously.
James's daughter Emma needed a costume.
And Dad said that he knew somebody who did that thing. And that person was Molly, and he took me to go meet her, and she made a costume for me.
James had introduced Molly as a friend from work.
Did you know about his relationship with Molly?
No.
She articulated to the jury what she saw and heard and remembered from that night.
I was still up doing homework at around 10 p.m. And that's around the time that Dad came home.
On cross-examination, the defense really tries to create some doubt with timing. Maybe he was in the garage working on his car, maybe she didn't know.
You'd agree with me that back in this time frame that your dad would frequently be in the garage, correct?
Yes.
Emma's most damaging testimony may be about that bloody t-shirt. Remember the one that was found in the road near the crime scene?
The t-shirt becomes so important to this case because it's a one-of-a-kind t-shirt. And here's the kicker. It was made by James Addie's daughter, Emma.
Do you recognize that shirt?
Yes.
Right. How do you recognize that shirt? She was able to identify it because she made it as a part of one of her classes. And so she was able to affirmatively say, that is the t-shirt that I made.
Yeah, I know that's my shirt.
She gave it to her father.
I brought them home that day after the contest, and Dad said that he would take one to the garage just to use as rags.
Addie's defense says that's not proof, that maybe Addie had just given the t-shirt to Molly.
Is it so implausible that one fiancé has a shirt that belonged to their fiancé?
As far as your marriage with James Addie, can you describe it for the jury?
Testifying next, the woman James Addie allegedly said was dead, his now ex-wife Melanie Addie. She filed for divorce soon after his arrest.
It was good sometimes, it was bad sometimes. I thought we both tried to make it work.
You were called to testify. Mm-hmm. How hard was that?
It's horrible. It's just horrible. You don't want to be there. I don't want to be in a position where I'm hurting him. I don't want to do that.
So in April of 2018, you were still married to Mr. Addie and living in that same home?
Yes.
Did you have any plans to divorce at that point?
No. He'd always been very hard on me about you know, how a wife should act, how a wife should be, and then he did this. He had an affair, and that's okay. No, we were done. We were done.
James Addie didn't react to his ex-wife taking the stand, but everybody else did. Anybody watching was riveted.
Prosecutors also asked Melanie about that outrageous story, the one they say James told Molly, that Melanie was dead.
Were you in a horrible car crash in October of 2017 around Christmas or New Year's?
No.
And is it fair to say you did not pass away in April of 2018?
That's correct.
After calling nearly 20 witnesses, the state rests its case.
Thank you, sir. You managed him down.
And now it's time for the defense to take its turn. All kinds of options here. They could introduce evidence, they could call witnesses, or they could put James Addie himself on the stand. Instead, they do none of the above.
Not not putting up a case for the defense is fairly common because the argument is it's the state's burden to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt.
Once my client puts a witness on the stand, now we're in competition for who is more likable, for who do we believe more. You lose the state's burden and you take on a burden yourself.
If the evidence will show that the state does not have proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Doubts are reasonable. Your doubts are reasonable because Jim did not kill Molly.
They attempted to raise enough reasonable doubt about the things that weren't there. There was no murder weapon. What would be the motive of a man in love killing his fiancée?
He was in love with Molly was the defense, and he was having an affair, but that didn't necessarily mean that he was the killer.
Closing arguments in this case ended up being on what would have been James and Molly's 3-year anniversary.
Molly Watson does not get to celebrate her 3-year wedding anniversary today, but you have the power to give her justice.
The jury deliberated about 2.5 hours the fate of James Addy and announced they had reached a unanimous decision.
All right, then. My understanding the jury has reached a verdict. Do I have a foreperson?
Yes, sir.
When the jury walked in, like 5 of the jury members looked at us. Like they glanced over and I thought, okay, I don't know if it's a good sign or not.
Verdict reads as follows. As to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant, James Addy, guilty of murder in the first degree.
The jury found James Addy guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Molly Watson and armed criminal action.
Oh, I was happy. I was so happy to hear that because my sister got justice.
Did you feel your husband should have been found guilty of murder?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Is he a killer?
apparently.
You asked me earlier what I was surprised at during the trial.
During the entire course of the trial, he failed to represent anything that I brought forward.
Up until this point, James Addy has fully exercised his right to remain silent throughout the trial, but now he's ready to open up and give the court his version of what he says really happened.
There was no way that I could have done this crime.
And he's going to point to someone he says is the true killer.
Thank you, have a seat. We're here today on 18 AC-TR 01983, State versus James Addy. Matter comes on today for final disposition.
2 months after his conviction, James Addy is formally sentenced.
Mr. Addy, having been convicted by a jury of your peers of the charge of murder in the first degree, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, that being the sentence mandated by law.
Once sentencing is over, the judge wants to hear from Addy about why he now claims his lawyer did not do a good job.
Anyone expecting regrets or remorse is in for quite a surprise.
Normally, criminal defendants keep their mouths shut, they say yes when they're supposed to, and they move on their way to get their appeal going.
Not James Addy. He is scheduled to spend the rest of his life in prison, but he's got plenty to say, beginning by reading a love letter to the woman he's convicted of killing.
Molly is the love of my life.
Addy insists that Molly was the love of his life. He says he misses her terribly and would have done anything to keep her happy. Addy is now asking for a new trial. He's complaining to the judge that his defense counsel was ineffective.
Honestly, let his defense attorney have it. He said that he did not think that TJ did a great job.
Can you give me an idea of what kind of stuff you wanted him to bring forward? Cell phone records, Facebook posts that were in discovery that showed motive that's somebody else.
Molly had an ex who, according to him, had stalked her, very much so had a motive to do harm to Molly as her wedding was approaching.
We reviewed all of the evidence collected during this investigation and presented the relevant admissible evidence at trial, and there was no evidence of any other person with a direct connection to Molly Watson's death.
That evidence pointed to one person, James Addy, who had the motive, means, and opportunity to take Molly Watson's life.
I would like to see him and ask him What were you thinking? Why did you do this to us? Why did you do this to you?
You don't see yourself as a victim?
Not at all. Molly's the victim. She's not here. She lost her life.
You just think of the lyrics of that song that Molly loved so much from the movie Tangled.
Bring back what once was mine, what once was mine.
Just a couple of days ago at work, I'm a mechanic and we have our bay doors open, and out of the blue, this balloon came right up to me and it says, "We love you, we miss you." And that was Molly telling me, "Hey, we're watching you." So it definitely felt good.
Friday nights at 9 on ABC. True crime.
True murder mystery.
Shocking.
Sex, betrayal, lies.
A bombshell.
The greatest true crime stories.
2020. Friday nights at 9.
In Texas, several young women have vanished without trace, only to later be found murdered in chillingly disturbing ways.
We're not talking about someone walking in the dark, after hours. We're talking about the middle of the day.
The method of their murder suggests a psychopath is on the loose.
He seemed to take pride, a sick kind of pride in his killing and in his technique with the tourniquet.
As the tourniquet killer grips the headlines, detectives race against time to unmask the predator haunting the community. Every lead slips through their fingers.
The master of lying and secrets and disguises.
When an unassuming telephone repairman is brought in for questioning about an unrelated crime, will a chilling discovery turn the investigation on its head?
He had to submit DNA as a result of now being a convicted sex offender.
Science, like DNA, has revolutionized criminal justice in my lifetime.
I didn't set out to kill her. That was not my intent.
Detectives piece together the evidence, slowly uncovering the face of a suspect. Which clue will expose the truth? What will be a killer's mistake? Police in Houston, Texas receive a report that 9-year-old Diana Rabola is missing. She's last seen at a grocery store just a few blocks from her home in Houston Heights. Andy Kahn, collaborating with the Houston Police Department, is urgently brought in to serve as the critical link between law enforcement and a deeply concerned family.
I was involved almost immediately with the Diana Rabola case. And here's somebody that's just walking down the street, buying a few items to take home for a family dinner. And boom.
2 days later, Diana's body is discovered on the loading dock of an abandoned building.
She was sexually assaulted, beaten, and then strangled.
She is found laying face up, a tourniquet wrapped tightly around her neck.
It's just unconscionable that someone can do this to a 9-year-old in the middle of the day. We're not talking about some isolated area. This is a populated part of the town. That's pretty brazen.
Detectives have encountered this chilling method of killing before. Diana's brutal murder bears an unsettling resemblance to another recent homicide. 2 years earlier, police discovered the body of 21-year-old Maria del Carmen Estrada in a parking lot behind a Dairy Queen in the Spring Branch neighborhood of Houston.
Maria was, a hard worker, trying to help her family, just taking public transportation to and from her work and just helping her family just go about life. And here she was again, vulnerable, by herself, no one else around. Seizing that opportunity, the killer abducts her, rapes her, kills her in excruciating slow fashion, and then dumps her.
Like Diana, Maria is found with a handmade tourniquet wrapped around her neck. District Attorney Kim Ogg is an assistant prosecutor in Harris County at the time. She's tasked with analyzing critical crime scene evidence.
When I'd worked in the Special Crimes Division of the Harris County District Attorney's Office, there were a series of crimes involving a signature mark, a tourniquet, left on the bodies, which came across my desk. They were brought by homicide investigators who were working the cases, trying to figure out the whodunit.
The similarities between Diana and Maria, the time between deaths, and the method of murder lead investigators to fear they may be dealing with a serial killer.
The tourniquet takes your fingers off the pulse, literally, but it gave the killer the ability to turn life on and off.
He had a profile. We see that he's attacking younger Hispanic women, young girls.
This is so methodically calculated as to how he picked his victims. These were young girls from the ages of 9 to 21, not doing anything wrong.
Who is responsible? Police need to build a profile of the killer. They focus on the locations of his attacks, centered in those Houston neighborhoods increasingly home to Latin American immigrants.
The neighborhoods in Houston were changing in the late 80s and 90s. They were going dramatically downhill in certain areas. Part of it was we had an immigrant population, very low on the socioeconomic scale, many times, many of them not citizens of the country, and so that created an opportunity for a serial killer who was looking for people who he could grab, rape, kill, and who might not be missed.
The one common denominator his victims had, besides being young, were they were by themselves. And little did they know that how vulnerable that made them to a sadistic predator.
I felt like it was only a matter of time before the next body would show up. That gumshoe detective work was applied.
They were able to extract DNA from Maria Estrada's fingernails.
Could DNA found under Maria's fingertips be a killer's mistake? In 1992, CODIS, a combined DNA index system that links profiles across jurisdictions in different parts of the United States, is still in its infancy. No connections are found.
There was no general testing of DNA.
You had problems in crime labs, and all sorts of Murphy's Law was going on with so many different entities as far as getting a match.
Investigators carefully preserve the DNA found under Maria's fingernails, knowing forensic science and databases are advancing rapidly. They hold on to the evidence, hoping for the day that her killer slips up and reveals his identity.
Looking for a serial murder was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so the DNA evidence was collected.
Detectives believe the killer has a clear profile for his victims. Now they're building one for him, knowing that to catch him, they must first understand him.
The way he would kill his victims shows you his true colors and his insatiable need to seek attention.
I think a master of lying and secrets and disguises and things that covered his trail.
Dr. Judy Ho, a renowned forensic neuropsychologist, highlights the critical importance of building a psychological profile to unmask the killer.
I think that there was a couple of components to this. One is very poor impulse control, so he just did whatever he felt like. But the other piece of it is that he probably derived some kind of sick joy from dominating people who were vulnerable. Notice that he doesn't necessarily dominate people who were his size. He's not picking on people who were his own size. And so he's looking for victims that he would clearly be declared winner. It was rigged from the start.
Without any other objective evidence, police might never have been able to find the correct killer.
Investigators need forensic evidence, but the science and database technology isn't advanced enough to deliver results. Police receive a call about a missing teenager, Dana Sanchez. She is last seen leaving her home, only to vanish without trace.
Again, 16-year-old teenager. Middle of the day, minding her own business, not doing anything wrong, not doing anything illegal, just doing what teenage girls do. You know?
A week goes by with no leads in Dana's disappearance, until a local news station receives an anonymous call from someone claiming to be her killer.
He has the audacity to contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found, just so he can make sure that he got credit for the latest murder in his own mind. That's mine.
The caller claims to be Dana Sanchez's killer.
He basically was telling the media that, yeah, there's a serial killer roaming loose out there, killing young girls, and you need to be aware of that.
When a local news station in Houston receives an anonymous call from a person who claims that he's a serial killer, police have to take it seriously.
To contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found. You can actually visualize him at home in front of the television waiting for the local news to capture the story of what he did, and him just salivating.
Looking for any clue in their search for 16-year-old Dana Sanchez, police arrive at a barren field on the outskirts of the city, and Dana's lifeless body lies sprawled, decomposing in the dirt.
She was tortured and is dumped like the rest of them. Someone that can do that without any care in the world and just leave her out there just to rot. It's about the lowest of the low you could possibly imagine of a life form in this universe.
Still wrapped around Dana Sanchez's neck is the murder weapon, a tourniquet.
Dana Sanchez was a bit older, 16 years old. The MO is the same, he strangled her. We don't know much more else. We can assume she was probably sexually assaulted. What we do know is that a victim profile, for sure, has emerged.
The third young Hispanic woman strangled with a tourniquet in 3 years confirms investigators' fears. The suspected killer's call to a local news station leaves detectives fearing they're being lured into a dangerous game of cat and mouse.
He seemed to take pride, a sick kind of pride in his killing and in his technique with the tourniquet. It worked for him. It was his signature. And it distinguished him from other individuals who kill people with their bare hands.
Investigators have 3 victims, each with the murder weapon left at the scene. With no other clues to identify the killer, the case captures national attention. The media dubs the unknown predator the tourniquet killer, thrusting him into the spotlight.
Notoriety and fame that serial killers want and then ultimately achieve, and then all of a sudden you're a household name, your name's in the paper, your name's on the news. He so desperately wanted that.
The ensuing media frenzy may have been just what he wanted, but the pressure is on police to catch the killer.
Nobody could find anything.
For 3 years, police strive to make gains in identifying the tourniquet killer. They analyze the anonymous call made to the local news station. They look for further links between cases and meticulously gather forensic evidence. When a local telephone repairman is questioned by police for an unrelated crime, detectives see no reason to suspect a link to the elusive tourniquet killer.
Here's the guy that worked for the phone company, telephone company, Southwestern Bell, as the repairman.
Maybe you wouldn't suspect a family man that seemed happy in his marriage and in his family life.
His name is Anthony Shaw, and he is suspected of committing an horrific crime.
All of a sudden, Anthony Shaw does a despicable act when he sexually abuses and assaults his 2 young daughters. They make an outcry. He's arrested.
He raped his daughters, and his daughter's outcry spurred his arrest.
The repairman accused of sexually abusing his own children is 36-year-old Anthony Shaw. Investigators who are hopeful of convicting him for crimes against his own children search for any evidence from his past, what had made him such a monster.
A few things stand out for me about Shaw's early life, right? He's very precocious. He's already sort of making, 4 or 5-year-old what could be construed as sort of sexual advances towards these little girls.
One of the biggest red flags was that he would actually torture animals at a young age. It shows a level of lack of empathy, lack of emotionality.
There was something going on with his sister as well, okay? Apparently he had stabbed her in the head with a screwdriver, and we know also from later reports that she didn't seem to be very empathetic towards him as well. Shaw used his sister to lure girls in the neighborhood back to, his house, or to grope them, to kiss them.
I think he instilled fear in his own sisters. And I think there was a part of his sisters that probably feared for themselves. They didn't do what he asked. And even though they knew that this couldn't lead to anything good, they were manipulated by him, and they were doing so possibly out of their own self-protection.
While investigating Shaw for sexual abuse of his own children, detectives hear from friends and neighbors that he appeared ordinary.
For a while, Shaw had a normal life. In addition to working at a regular job during the day, in the evening he performed the piano. So he was known amongst people who went and attended live music functions as well. There's some people that worked for the phone company astonished and were dumbfounded. He said, I worked with him. I know him. I went to lunch with Anthony. Sure. I can't believe that's him. He was so nice, such a normal guy.
Anthony Shaw seemed like a happily married man.
I do have to wonder about the true nature of that relationship. Did he really get married because he had genuine affection for this person, or was she basically used as a pawn in his game?
That's part of the facade that they try to maintain. That's like their Jekyll and Hyde ego that they like to have. Is there some sort of normalcy where no one suspects anything?
We could see that from when Anthony was a child, from the torturing and killing of innocent animals to putting a screwdriver through his sister's head. So sadly, it's no surprise that he would definitely abuse his own family members as well.
It takes investigators 1 year to build a case against Shaw for the abuse of his own daughters.
So Anthony Shaw is convicted in 1998 of molesting his 2 daughters.
He's put on probation like many sex offenders are, particularly on your first offense, so that's not a surprise. He was put on probation. But the catch was he had to submit DNA as a result of now being a convicted sex offender.
When detectives confirm a match, they are stunned to discover that the assault on his family was just one piece of Shaw's larger web of horrific crimes.
And this is the turning point in the case.
Five years after his conviction for the abuse of his own daughters, the combined DNA index system, CODIS, established by the FBI, allows law enforcement agencies to share and compare DNA profiles across jurisdictions.
Because the laws had changed and DNA samples could and were taken from individuals charged with certain crimes, his sample was entered into CODIS, the national system for matching DNA to known individuals or unknown individuals.
When detectives check Anthony Shaw's DNA against unsolved crimes on the CODIS network, it reveals a match they'd been looking for 8 years.
The DNA was then ultimately matched from Estrada's fingernails.
6 years into an 8-year sentence of probation for indecency with a child, and 11 years since Maria del Carmen Estrada's murder, investigators in Houston arrest telephone repairman Anthony Shaw.
There wasn't anything to link him with the murders until you were able to run his DNA.
Police are confident that whoever killed Maria del Carmen Estrada is also responsible for killing Diana Rabola and Dana Sanchez. But with no DNA available from the scene of those crimes, detectives decide to confront Anthony Shaw in an interview. Detectives gear up for a high-stakes showdown and interrogation, hoping it will be the key to breaking the case wide open. As the interview begins, Shaw sits down and calmly presents his version of events, while the officers tread carefully, uncertain of what lies ahead.
And I ran across this really beautiful young lady for your ride. She got me down. She was on my way to work every morning.
Shaw initially admits to officers that he did meet Maria del Carmen Estrada on the day that she went missing.
One day it was misting rain. She saw me, asked me for a ride. It was one place she was talking about, yeah, she wanted to go out. Well, we pulled in. We had a Dairy Queen. You know, Rusty? Yeah, she had a store up there. She was amenable to a kiss.
Listening to Shaw recount these events, I don't hear the self-absorbed narcissist that people might attribute to him. I hear someone telling a story, very matter-of-factly, all right? It lacks empathy, right? But it's not embellished.
When I pushed her further, it got out of hand. Remember, I opened her glass and she was resisting. When I just take consumption, not like voices in my head, but just driven. And I was going to have her regardless. I don't know what the hell you call it. I've tried to understand this, but I wanted to possess her somehow. She became real violent, just fighting wanting to get out of the car.
Detectives brace themselves as Anthony Shaw begins to talk, and then talk some more. What he says next will change the entire course of the investigation.
I didn't set out to kill her. That was not my intent. But it got out of hand. I strangled her.
Detectives are stunned by Shaw's chilling honesty. The interview takes a dramatic turn as he begins what appears to be a confession, claiming he strangled Maria del Carmen Estrada.
When he was interviewed by law enforcement, there did seem to be a desire to clear his conscience.
Officers, keeping calm as Shaw confesses to murder, are blindsided by a new revelation. In 1993, 14-year-old Selma, a name used as a pseudonym to protect her identity, suffers a brutal attack. Is another mystery about to be solved?
I'm guessing she was probably 16, 17 at the time. I'm not really sure how old. She was young, she was attractive. She was a latchkey kid coming home from high school or whatever school she was going to. So I had broken into the house, which wasn't easy. The door was unlocked, and I waited for her to get there.
So the living rape victim was a young person whose house he surveilled for several days. Shaw was a telephone lineman. He had access to every neighborhood in Houston.
You can basically spy on so many different people throughout the day.
He had a reason to be there. He had a marked vehicle. It made it totally easy for him to just look for victims and exercise his demon.
And I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't have to take a life and tie her up with electrical cord. And raped her.
I didn't know of her existence when I worked on Deanna's case and on Carmen's case in the early 90s, until he admitted to them a decade later, after he was already caught and his DNA identified and matched.
Shaw holds back from taking Selma's life, but he confesses to detectives his insatiable urge to kill will ultimately become unstoppable.
Strangely, she fought like hell. I mean, just wouldn't go along with anything.
The details he provides about the targeting of 9-year-old Diana Rabola are devastating.
And she was so afraid, I'm sure that I don't recall what type of cord or strand or piece of wire or something. And did the same thing. I don't know why. It kept happening. couldn't stop it.
I think Anthony Shore wants to be a paradox to the country. Yet on one hand, he wants credit for these brutal rapes and murders and anything else he wants. Yet at the same time, he wants everybody to know how sorry he was and please ask for my forgiveness and so forth. You know what? That day's long gone. You blew that.
For detectives tasked with proving the case against him, Shore's confessions are a treasure trove, and he's far from finished. As he keeps talking, he unveils chilling details about how he crossed paths with Dana Sanchez in 1995.
I was making a corner. I just said, hey, if you love, go ahead. She says, man, I'm going to see my boyfriend somewhere. I forget where she told me. I said, no problem. I'll jump right in.
He's going to younger girls to comfort himself, okay? If he starts actually now talking to this girl and confiding in her, it's probably because he knows that older women would think him strange, right? Younger girl is going to listen.
I was flirting with her heavily. At the time I had really long hair. She was joking like, no, I've got a boyfriend, this and that. So I grabbed her, pulled her into the back of the van. I knew there was nothing I could do to get out of this. And I used a ligature in the oiler. I want to say it was a yellow, twisted nylon rope, but I don't remember for sure.
The profile of Shore's victim resembles very much the little girls he used to entice over to his house vis-a-vis his sister. Shore is on his way back to childhood.
I pulled her out into a field and left like a bat out of hell, scared to death. Do you know where her body got found? Yes, I did. What? An anonymous phone call. Who made the phone call? I did.
Shore admits the anonymous tip that led investigators to Dana Sanchez's body came from Shore himself.
And when Dana's not found, I guess, I gotta get some sort of attention. Someone's got to know about it. Anthony Shore, obviously was in tune with the news of what he had done, and evidently, since nobody knew, particularly the media, nobody was broadcasting to the world, particularly local news, wasn't telling anybody about the latest murder. He certainly wanted credit, wanted to be known.
In Texas, full disclosure can lead to plea deals, even in cases involving serial killers. If Shore is trying to avoid death row, his chilling arrogance suggests he won't succeed. He seems to take a twisted pride in recounting his crimes. He then delivers yet another shocking revelation.
Anthony had another victim.
It's unfathomable what happened to her, and she was the first.
She started freaking out, and I begged her. I said, please stop doing this. Let me just give you a ride. She's like, no. I freaked out. I don't know what came over me.
Anthony Shore reveals that 6 years before killing Maria del Carmen Estrada, there's another victim.
Lori's case was in 1986.
Lori's 14 years old. Think about your children who are 14 years old. It's unfathomable what happened to her.
Lori Tremblay was full of life, bright, happy, deeply loved, but oblivious to the danger that she faced if coming into contact with Anthony Shore.
Lori was walking to school, doing what thousands and millions of youngsters do every day.
One morning, this girl comes up and asks me for a cigarette while I was at the stoplight. I asked if she needed a ride. And I gave her a ride. And a couple days went by. She saw me. I gave her a ride again to school. She and I became involved just in the sense of kissing. Hello, goodbye. I started giving her a ride on a semi-regular basis.
He keeps returning and develops this very strange relationship with a much younger girl, which is not outside his modus operandi if you consider his daughters, and starts to confide in her, right? And she listens to him. He decides to up the ante, and wants to kiss, wants to take it further.
One day it was misting rain. She saw me, asked me for a ride, and I wanted to get more involved than just the kissing and stuff, and undid her bra. Everything got out of hand. She freaked out, and we got into a fight.
As Shaw speaks, the revelations come thick and fast. Details that would have stayed hidden if not for the DNA breakthrough that shattered the case wide open. The officers listen intently, piecing together the chilling truth that he's finally laying bare.
This one freaked out, threatened to tell, and that was the stress that created that, unempathetic, low impulse. Everything was just on super drive.
I tried to knock her out because I just really freaked out. It's not right. I'm not justifying it. It's hard to talk about. I took this cotton cord and I tried to make sure that she would never ever tell him about it, even though I knew that was insane.
He tells investigators he didn't use his signature tourniquet on Laurie. He says that his trademark killing method was adopted after an accident during her murder.
So Shore changes his MO and uses this tourniquet because he claims that he injured his finger while murdering Laurie Lee Tremblay with his own bare hands.
Shaw claims to have callously dumped Laurie's body behind a Mexican restaurant before returning to work, and that same evening performs piano at a local jazz club.
That's how serial killers operate. They blend in, so they remain anonymous, so they don't tip off that there's anything wrong with them.
If detectives accept Shaw's claims of full disclosure, Laurie Tremblay emerges as his first murder victim.
Six to 7 years passed between his rape and strangulation of Laurie Lee Tremblay in 1986 and his rape and strangulation of Maria Carmen Estrada in 1992. This is suggestive of that cooling off period that the FBI developed many years ago, right? Serial killers, 2 to 3 victims, at least over a period of time with the cooling off period.
Investigators' research tells them many serial killers follow a pattern known as the killing cycle, which typically progresses through 7 distinct phases.
The first phase, there's this aura phase where you start to withdraw from society. And then you begin to troll your victim, right? We're all familiar with that term now, thanks to social media. Then there's this flirting phase, phase 3. Phase 4 is when you capture the victim. Phase 5 is when you murder them. 6 is when you take something of theirs, a totem or a trophy, which I prefer. And then 7 is depression. 7 is what, so this 6-year period, he is undergoing some sort of catharsis, some sort of chrysalis phase. And he's going to come back with a vengeance.
Despite Shaw confessing to 4 murders and sexual assault, he has not been tried. Detectives focus on charging him with Maria del Carmen Estrada's killing, backed by the strongest forensic evidence. Held without bail, investigators intensify their efforts to verify his chilling claims.
Just going through the evidence, working hard, interviewing people.
Investigators build a case based on DNA evidence, Shaw's confessions, and the modus operandi of the tourniquet killer. In October 2004, Shaw appears at the District Court of Harris County, charged with the murders of Laurie Tremblay, Maria del Carmen Estrada, Diana Rabola, and Dana Sanchez. He pleads guilty.
Sometimes we do see, on very rare occasions, somebody who truly feels like they are born evil, and I believe that that's Anthony.
In hindsight, we see red flags at a very early age, the starting of a recipe for a serial killer.
November 15th, 2004, a jury sentences Anthony Shaw to death by execution.
The people whose children and family members were murdered are broken from the crimes of Anthony Shaw. And there's really nothing that we in the system can do to fix what happened to them. But I do believe that by finishing the case and asking that the sentence be carried out, that at least they can move on. And there are no future dates for them to have to worry about. No more court appearances, no last-minute appeals. It's finally over for the justice system. Of course, the pain that's caused by those victims is never over.
District Attorney Kim Ogg becomes responsible for scheduling Shaw's execution.
When I became the Harris County District Attorney, my prior relationship with Anthony Shaw our paths crossed again all these years later. And it became my duty to schedule executions of people who had already received the death penalty. Shore's name was on the list. And because of the age of the case, the overwhelming evidence, the fact that I knew Shore's work, I felt it was appropriate that he be the next in line for execution.
But as his execution date looms, now bald Shore delivers yet another shocking confession that leaves investigators reeling.
He comes forward with these 11th hour confessions to buy himself time. Could have been seeking to extend his own life. He bragged about up to, I think, 60 additional rapes.
I learned that there were, according to him, many other rape victims. We've only learned that as his death date approached. And that he considered it an accomplishment to be able to rape women without murdering them. And so he confessed to a number of alleged rapes that he said he committed on women that he met in social settings or bars, where he would slip them Rohypnol, the date rape drug, take them to his van, rape them, sometimes sell them to others, and then deliver them back, supposedly without them knowing what had happened to them.
Where I knew we weren't through with him. So it wasn't surprising to me that after he was executed, all of a sudden we find out he was claiming 60 some odd sexual assaults, rapes, and any other horrific offenses.
Law enforcement will look at the claims that he made, and we'll go back and look for old cases. I would hope that anyone watching this who came into contact with Shore and who felt like they might have been violated, whether the statutes run or not, whether it was ever reported, I hope they'll let law enforcement know.
On January 18th, 2018, 55-year-old Anthony Shore is executed by lethal injection.
I don't think we're ever going to know what was going through Anthony Shore's mind at the time of his death, but I don't see how it couldn't have been the faces of his victims.
I can tell you from being up in Huntsville the day of the execution with the victims' families, unequivocally, Anthony Allen Shore's reign of terror ended that day for them, and justice was carried out.
We're rethinking the death penalty all over America. I think Americans are evolving in the way we look at it. I know that I am. But when you look at a guy like Anthony Shore, in my 30 years, he is the worst of the worst. And as long as the law exists, unfortunately, there are going to be individuals like Shore. But he earned his way to the top of the list on Texas's death row.
There's a reason we have the death penalty in the state of Texas. And Anthony Allen Shore is numero uno why we have it.
Well, there's a lot we can learn from Anthony Shore. In looking at people, we can't tell. No one can tell who's a murderer and who's not. I think that we have to support science and technology in and applied to criminal justice. We should never get away from the basics as law enforcement and prosecutors, but that science like DNA has revolutionized criminal justice in my lifetime.
I vividly will never forget Anthony Allen Shore and the murders of Maria, Dana, Diana, and Lori. I think if anything you're going to take away from this is never assume if you're out walking by yourself that you're not going to be targeted or you're not going to be a victim. Because like it or not, there's Anthony Allen Shores walking and living amongst us today. That's the sad reality. They are your next door neighbors, they're your coworkers, they're your friends, your business partners, people you recreate with, people you go out to dinner with. You just don't know. And he's living proof of that.
When Anthony Shore claimed the lives of his victims, he believed his crimes would remain buried in the shadows, beyond the reach of justice. But what Shore didn't count on were the leaps in science and forensic technology that would one day catch up with him.
His daughter's outcry spurred his arrest, which led to the DNA sample being taken from him because he was convicted. And when his sample was entered into the CODIS database, it matched.
What he did to his two daughters ends up solving the murders of the 4 young girls, because if he hadn't have committed those atrocities, the abuses on his daughters, who knows if it would ever have been solved.
Leaving a trail of forensic evidence that connected his horrific crimes against his children to a series of murders was a killer's mistake.